Why do you feel fear in motorsports? How do you deal with it? How can we reach the limit in a safe way without crashing? I talk about all that in this classroom presentation at the Motor Enclave as I coached many drivers on track in many different cars during the weekend. If you apply this concept in your driving, you will be better than 80% of the racing drivers around the world. Enjoy.
This here is Suelio Alameda. He is our first guest of the year in our series of bringing in highly experienced celebrity coaches. Suelio this year was the champion in Radical Cup North America in the 1340 class. And he discovered that he can explain racing very well. I want to spend time talking about driving. And he's got a few things that he wants to share with you. And of course, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask a question. This is Suelio's time. So I think the first topic he wanted to talk about was fear, right?
Exactly. First of all, thank you for the opportunity, for the trust. I've been coaching more and more real-life drivers. I started with sim racing coaching. I did 2,500 hours of coaching in the sim, and then more and more real-life drivers started using my products, my online courses and everything, to the point where people started flying me to Dubai and to the US to coach them in person. And then I realized that many of these concepts for sim racing actually worked very well in real life, 99.9%. And then I started in 2024, as I was racing in Radical in real life, I needed to find even more connection points and really try to find a way to make racing simulators the most effective possible, because there is a way to use the simulator wrong. There's a way to overdrive. I think someone was talking earlier today that, oh, I did a very fast lap in the sim, but I crashed 10 times before that. That method is doable in the sim, but it's not in real life. So if you work on a mentality, on a way of driving in the simulator that you cannot transfer to real life, you're wasting your time on the simulator. And that is why a lot of people, a bad first impression of the simulator, because they think, oh, it's not useful because you cannot press the reset button in real life. Well, you can emulate a mentality of driving in real life in the sim to find ways to approach the limit that are transferable to real life, and that works. Since I did move to real life driving, I stopped crashing the simulator because I realized that if I kept overdriving the sim, I would not really benefit from that practice time in real life. And since then, I've been building a new online course that's going to be only for real-life drivers. That's called How to Develop Safety, Consistency, and Confidence in Motorsports, using all the techniques that I had to learn at the Radical Championship because we had 2 days of practice before the race. How are you going to approach the limits so fast and compete against drivers who have been doing Le Mans and be competitive? Well, you have to find the process that's not going to be based on guessing. You don't want to guess how late you want to brake. You don't want to guess how much speed you want to carry. You want to really find an approach that builds up to that point. By using the simulator, I was able to really describe those things very well, and that's my new objective for 2025 is building that. So I want to ask a question for you guys. Where does fear come from? Crashing? Fear of failure, okay. Okay, crashing. That's a strong point.
You haven't done it yet? You did crash.
I want to tell a story. Last year, I was racing at Radical, traveling a lot, and every day, race day, I wake up, I look in the mirror, in the window actually, and I'm afraid that it's gonna rain. Because if it rains, what am I gonna do? I don't know. I never raced in the rain before. And I was so afraid I could not enjoy the weekends because I was literally there racing. It was dry, it was beautiful, but I was afraid it was gonna rain at some point. And then I started working with a performance therapist, and she told me something that I will never forget, and that is actually written here. I'm gonna talk to you guys. Fear comes from lack of control and unpredictability. When you don't know that you are going to be able to handle it, then that mystery is your nightmare. So as long as we find a way to slowly find control as we approach the limit, then we can get rid of the fear and we can actually learn how to control without actually crashing. I developed a way to find the limit in the dry that was good enough so that I could try that in the rain. And then it poured. It was like Road America, we couldn't see anything. We were driving, it was all sprayed during the race. We qualified in the dry, and the race was in the rain. And I had to do it. I knew that after that race, if I did it right, I would completely lose my fear of rain. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I wake up, race day, if I see that it's gonna rain, I'm like, I don't care. If it rains, I know exactly what to do. So the fear of unpredictability and the lack of control, gone. I was like, okay, then if I was able to completely solve my fear, I can then teach others how to do that. And it applies to the rain, but it also applies to the dry. And that's what we've been working a lot this morning with Melissa. If you don't know what is going to happen at the limit, then you become afraid. So let's try to solve that. And that leads us to a very good point, because we talk about the limit like it's the limit. It's one point, it's one thing that happens and suddenly you're crashing. But it's not really like that. There are different forms of limit. You can lock up the tires, you can understeer, you can oversteer. These are all forms of limit. So when you carry a little bit too much speed and you miss the apex, you have reached the limit, but you're not gonna crash. So that's interesting then. Wait, that means I have reached some sort of limit that I can deal with. and that is teaching me something. That for me is key, the importance of understeer, and not only feeling that it's happening, but knowing how to induce it, how to on purpose make the car understeer. Because then you're now at one limit, not the limit that's gonna bite you, one limit that is gonna teach you. It's gonna teach you what speeds you're gonna end up carrying at that corner. Because if you're understeering, you can probably carry 5 miles per hour more than that when you really reach the limit on all 4 tires. So that understeer is telling you that's the right range. Now, from that understeer, you can already start setting up a braking reference. And then you start building the limit in a way that's approachable and that's not gonna bite you. It's only gonna bite you if you're always under the limit, if you're always guessing, and then you go over way too much because you never approached it slowly. So let's say the limit is here and you're afraid. Your fear of unpredictability, you're here. Okay, you're gonna guess braking a little bit later, but you know, like a blink of an eye is 50 meters later that you're braking, and that might be too much. So you're here, and then suddenly you're braking here, and then the car is too fast, you're still on the brakes, and then you induce a form of limit that's gonna bite you. You're gonna lose the rear and you're gonna crash, and now you go back to here because you're afraid again. And you get into that cycle of, I'm under the limit, I'm crashing, I'm under the limit, I'm crashing. It's actually way more productive to approach the limit and flirt with it in the right ways so that you stay on it. And when you go a little bit over, you're not going too much over because you know that that's the range. That's the real use of inducing some forms of limit in a controlled way. That's my new obsession. I've been doing this thing. I drove at Daytona last week in a TCR, and the first thing I did was, okay, let's get this thing to understeer in all apexes, to determine what's the gear, to determine what's the braking point. And then from there, I started moving the braking point a little bit, which naturally would make me rotate a little bit more, but all within a very controlled system that bypasses fear completely. I believe there are 2 safe ways to really test the limit of the car. First one is threshold. So as soon as you get on track, the first thing you need to know in a safe way, so not braking late, but you need to brake as hard as you can and get some kind of ABS or a little bit of locking just to feel, okay, this is how much my speed can go down. When you get that information, that's going to be very useful later on defining your braking references. That's the first form of limit that we want to test. In the very same corner, so you're braking before a corner, you're testing the limit here. In the same corner, now you're going to turn in, you're still under the limit, you're still testing. By the time you get close to the minimum speed or to the apex, that's where you start turning a lot more because the speeds are low. The way we approach the limit is by first testing the tires on the lowest speeds of the corner and on the lowest corners of the track. And then we start building up. Okay, you're not gonna test the tire on a flat corner on cold tires. You wanna test it on a hairpin. You go to a hairpin, you get 30%, 40% throttle, you like, turn a lot. And then it's gonna be good because you're gonna warm up your front tires and you're gonna feel how much G's you can get, how much rotation you can get. And then on the next lap, you try that, and on the second slowest corner of the track, on the minimum speed of that corner, you try a little bit more. So the safest place to try that is on the minimum speeds of every corner. So now you have 2 points of stress for every corner. You have to brake very hard. Of course, if it's not like a hard braking zone, then you're not gonna have to go into threshold anyways. Mostly the hairpins, you test the braking very early. You're off the limit, you're under the limit, and then a lot. So you can test those 2 points. We know how much it can decelerate. We know how much it can rotate through understeer. We're gonna start braking a little bit later and turning a little bit more with a little bit more speed. And then we're gonna start blending those 2 limits to a point where you are braking late, you are turning in, the car is kind of on the limit already, and then you're getting more and more rotation to the minimum speed where you're now staying on the limit throughout this whole process. And you see, I'm not even talking about exit. I'm talking about just entry. Because as soon as you get that right, you accelerate, you're out, you're good. Of course, there are technical things to talk about the exit, but generally speaking, exits are consequence of how well you did the entries. I've been working with students for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, not talking about exit. Just, okay, fix this, and then the exit naturally becomes better, and he naturally uses all the exit, and it just happens magically because it is a consequence. I believe there are 4 pillars that apply to everything in motorsports, 4 essential pillars of car handling skills. One is feeling understeer. The second one is feeling oversteer. The third one is inducing understeer. And the fourth one is inducing oversteer. So it looks very simple, but can you do it? And that's the thing that if I ask you, of course, in the simulator, that's how I did it, that it helps a lot. I asked a lot of real-life students that were working with me in the simulator to spin the car on purpose, and they could not do it. On entry. And on exit, it's fine. It's easy, right? Just accelerate if the car has a lot of power. But on entry, just spin the car on purpose, using everything that you try to avoid, because we already spun on entry. It happens because you trade brake a little bit too much, and like you brake a little bit too deep, and the car just goes, right? You don't have a lot of control. But when you actively try to do it, that's where like, wait. And I told Melissa today, if you can cause it, you can prevent it. So that's the idea. We're working on inducing understeer today. At some point, we're gonna be able to minimize that and get the car to be close to using all 4 tires. And that's where you find the true limit in an approachable way again.
And it sounds a little bit like the Karate Kid. Wax on, wax off, paint the fence up and down, and he didn't understand, why are you making me do this? And these pillars are teaching drivers to feel and read that grip as it builds and peaks and drops. If you can feel it, you're reading it, and then if you can induce it, you know what is causing it, and you can manage that. You can use more or less of it to get the balance you need or the tire management that you need.
There is one way that you can communicate with the car, which is exactly by feeling the resistance of the steering wheel. A car without power steering is literally transferring that self-centering resistance of the front tires through all the mechanisms to your hands. So I told Melissa this morning, you can listen to what's happening to the tire with your hands. Like, you can literally feel that when you start turning and you start braking a little bit, it gets heavier. Why? Because the self-centering force is heavier. But at the same time, that's telling you there is more load on the front tires. If you're strangling the steering wheel, then you're like this. You're not actually feeling what's happening. You're not understanding. The car is trying to tell you something. Hey, there's more load on the front tires. Hey, there's less load, and you're not listening to it. I particularly developed this preference for no power steering. My teammates in the TCR, they use the power steering on all the way, and I use it all the way down. Like, there's no way to make it like heavier. I turn it off basically because I'm braking to the bus stop at Daytona. I start braking, I do this, and then the car goes, because the toe is negative in the front of the track. So the car is going, and I'm feeling exactly what's happening with the balance by relaxing my hands and feeling those forces on the steering. And then I'm doing this, the steering is straight. This is the most beautiful thing ever. Like, when you start turning, you give this and the car goes. And then I did this and then the car goes. And now I'm doing the whole corner, turning left, the car's going right, like the car's quote. So those things—
Turn right to go left?
Exactly. Those things are only possible if you are able to communicate with the steering. And that's why I created the term light hands technique. And that was initially for braking. As soon as you start braking, if you relax your hands, the car will self-balance for you. You don't have to strangle the steering and try to go straight. And actually that's more dangerous, because if you hit a bump and the car goes like this, you strangling the steering, you're gonna amplify the problem and the car is gonna dance even more. Let's say you brake and you let the steering go. It's gonna do its thing. You can do this, brake, and the car is gonna go straight. It's gonna accommodate itself on all the bumps and everything. You see my onboard driving at Sebring on that exit. Yeah. The steering is doing all this. It's not me. I'm just relaxing and letting the car talk to me. What happens when you relax your hands is that you're able to not think about applying a steering angle, but how much force you're applying. So the steering angle is a state, and whatever you try to move the state accelerates that state, right? So that's the force. So if you try to add a lot of force, then you're adding a lot of acceleration on that movement. But if you do a little bit less, you're able to accelerate like 1 or 2 degrees. And you can do that with a lot of precision if you relax your hands. If you try to do this, you're just spending a lot of energy and you're not feeling what the feedback is, and it's terrible.
Yep, the follow-on benefit is physical, that because you're using lighter energy overall, you're consuming less energy, and because the body's more relaxed, you make better choices. You take in more oxygen, your brain has more function, your cardiovascular has more endurance, because you're not using that extra bit.
Just look at Max Verstappen driving in the sim. He's like
that's what he looks like all the time.
Exactly. So this guy is the reason I race in real life. He called me when I was champion in Canada, and he was like, hey, you want to try a real car? And then we did a championship. We did a sim practice before a race in Canada at a racetrack called Calabogie, and I did a 2:24.6 in the simulator. And then I was practicing, and I was like 2:26 in real life on practice day. Quali day, I do a 2:24.6, and we're both like, that was insane. So I also wouldn't say rely on lap times. Lap times are useless. Like, it's really what is perfection within those conditions. Because even in the same track, on the same day, the lap time changes 2 seconds. So there's no point in judging whether the sim is accurate or not by the lap times, because the sim might be 20 degrees track and here might be 60 degrees track. Like, even that, I'm trying to judge how can I make the car behave X or Y, rather than what's the lap time that I'm doing in the sim versus real life. I solved an issue of a student in Dubai. He was afraid of racing because he was afraid of dirty air and everything. He was doing a lot of track days and test days alone, but he started racing. He was always letting everyone pass and like just lifting in the middle of the straight because there's someone behind. And I was like, okay, we gotta fix this. So we created a little mantra, on their ass. That's it. I just started saying the radio, on their ass, on their ass, on their ass, on their ass. And I was like, saying whatever, on their ass, on their ass, on their ass. And then like, literally the next race, he was right there and making passes and just like obsessing about being as close as possible to the cars ahead. Fixed it. Now every other race, he's like, when he realizes that he's missing a little bit and he's relaxing, he says out loud, on their ass, and he goes. So it really helps. Thank you, man.
Oh, you're brilliant.
That's
I knew
cool.
that would be fun. It was everything I'd hoped for.
Thanks, man.
If you're a racing driver and you want to reach an advanced level, there's a faster and easier way to become competitive. I've gone from this to this in 5 years. Now, we've created the perfect free driver development guide to help you understand the right order of racing skills to develop if you want to become a competitive driver as quickly as possible. This guide was made after 3,000 hours of combined high-level coaching.